Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is an absolute game changer for global food security and economic resilience. We're going to demystify the exact blueprint of how integrated agricultural schemes can, quite literally, structurally reverse rural poverty. We're talking about real, actionable strategies that can take a struggling, exhausted plot of dirt and turn it into a thriving microeconomy.
So let me ask you this. How do you take a small farmer and completely triple their income in just 36 months? I know, it sounds like this massive, completely impossible promise, right? But the data and the models we're unpacking today prove that it is not just possible, it's a highly systematic, step-by-step process.
To wrap our heads around how this actually works, we're going to follow a bit of a tale of two farms. We'll be tracking two very different folks. First, the two-acre farmer who has access to at least some rain or canals. And second, the highly vulnerable one-acre farmer who is totally trapped in a drought-prone zone.
But before we get into the solutions, let's look at Section 1, the marginal farmer crisis.
Before any kind of help arrives, the situation on the ground is, well, pretty grim. Imagine having 2 acres. You're maybe bringing in 45 to 60,000 rupees a whole year, but you're drowning in 50 to 80,000 rupees of high-interest debt from informal moneylenders. We're talking staggering interest rates, like 24%. It's brutal. On the flip side, picture our 1-acre farmer. Their situation is even scarier. With less than 600 millimeters of rainfall a year, they are constantly fighting severe water scarcity, facing a 40 to 60% risk of total crop loss and getting stuck in this vicious cycle of distress migration just to survive. That's the baseline we're working with.
So, how do we fix it? Let's move into Section 2, reimagining 2-acre farms.
The secret sauce here is the integrated livelihood model. Think of this like a giant, living puzzle where you are stacking different elements together. You know, back in the day, a farmer might bet everything on just one crop. Not anymore. Now, everything is connected. The crop waste goes to feed the dairy cattle, the cows produce manure, which goes into vermicompost, which then fertilizes the horticulture, the fruits and veggies. Then any surplus gets processed into goods, like pickles, which opens up a whole new stream of non-farm income. By stacking these enterprises, the farm turns into this beautiful closed-loop system where literally nothing goes to waste.
But obviously, you can't just build that kind of ecosystem out of thin air, right? You need capital, and you need a safety net. This is where we translate government bureaucracy into actual, tangible benefits. You stack the programs. A farmer uses a Kisan credit card to get cheap credit at around 4%. Then they tap into the PMKSY scheme for a 55% subsidy on drip irrigation, which saves a ton of vital water. And finally, they back the whole thing up with PMFBY crop insurance, giving them up to 2 lakh rupees in coverage. This combination literally waters and protects the entire ecosystem.
Now, you definitely don't do all of this on day one. If you try that, you'll just drown the farmer in debt. Instead, you use a paced 3-year roadmap to build compounding success. Year 1 is strictly foundational, fixing up the soil health and maybe starting some backyard poultry. Year 2 is where you start scaling up, adding the drip irrigation and bringing in dairy through ag development loans from places like NABARD. By year 3, that's when you're planting fruit orchards through rural programs and aiming for that incredible, totally debt-free status. It's a structured rhythm.
Once this is all integrated, the sheer resilience of the model is just mind-blowing. Paddy and wheat might bring in 40 grand. Dairy, another 40. Seasonal veggies at 30,000, horticulture 25, and poultry another 18. What's so brilliant here is that even if a pest ruins the vegetables, or the monsoon is a little late for the paddy, the dairy and poultry are still pumping out cash. The farmer's livelihood is completely insulated.
Which brings us to the magic number. From that struggling baseline of roughly 50,000 rupees, this stacked 3-year approach catapults the 2-acre farmer's income to 165,000 rupees a year. That is a massive 3.3x income multiplier. We aren't talking about a tiny incremental improvement here. We are talking about a total economic rescue.
All right, but what if you don't even have 2 acres? What if the sky just completely refuses to rain? That brings us to Section 3, surviving the drought zone.
For our 1-acre drought farmer, the #1 priority is not profit, it's survival. You have to capture every single drop of water. You literally have to engineer resilience into the land. The strategy here leans heavy on structural changes. We're talking massive farm ponds, like 500 to 1,000 cubic meters, funded by rural employment schemes to harvest any monsoon runoff. You add micro-couchments with stone buns to stop soil from washing away, percolation pits to recharge dry wells, and plastic mulching to cut evaporation down by 30 to 40%. Doing all this breaks that awful cycle of migration because it actually holds enough moisture in the ground to grow something.
But surviving a drought takes a village. The government steps up with huge infrastructure pushes, like the PM Kusum initiative, which hands out a massive 90% subsidy for solar pumps so farmers aren't bleeding money on expensive diesel. But the government can't cover every single gap. That's exactly where the private sector swoops in. Microfinance institutions start offering flexible, collateral-free loans. AgriTech startups come in with app-based crop advice and real-time weather alerts. It's this beautiful public-private handshake that gets those crucial survival tools over the finish line.
Once you've actually secured survival, how do you pivot to making real money? Let's explore Section 4, making dry lands profitable.
Because this land is so fragile, the recovery plan has to be aggressive, but highly calculated. In the first few months, it's all about digging those ponds and getting tough, drought-tolerant seeds like pearl millet or sorghum into the soil. Moving into years 1 and 2, you get the solar pumps and drip systems online. But the real magic? That happens in years 2 and 3. The farmer transitions to low-water, high-value, perennial crops, things like moringa or medicinal aloe vera. And the best part? These are secured by contract farming buybacks, meaning before the seed even hits the dirt, the farmer knows for a fact they have a guaranteed buyer.
When you look at the projections, the difference is honestly night and day. Without these integrated schemes, a farmer is just stuck, barely scraping by on 22,000 to 26,000 rupees a year, totally stagnant. But when you layer in the solar pumps, the farm ponds, the moringa, and that contract farming, the growth curve absolutely brasts past the baseline over those 36 months.
And boom! The drought farmer's income surges to 76,000 rupees. That is a phenomenal 3.5x recovery multiplier. On land that, historically, couldn't even guarantee a harvest half the time. It's incredible.
So, what are the big takeaways? Let's wrap things up with Section 5, 5 keys to transformation.
Here are the 5 structural pillars that prove systemic rural poverty can actually be reversed. Number 1, diversification is everything. It literally triples income. Relying on one crop is a thing of the past. Number 2, you've got to layer financial schemes from the state and groups like NABARD to build a zero-gap safety net. Number 3, a drought does not mean zero income. Targeted tech like solar and drip irrigation absolutely works. Number 4, the private sector and AgriTech apps can step in right where government reach stops. And finally, number 5, you need a phased, step-by-step roadmap to prevent debt overload and let those returns actually compound. Which leaves us with one final massive question. If a structured, integrated 3-year roadmap can completely reverse poverty and engineer real resilience on some of the absolute hardest, driest acres of land out there, what on earth is stopping us from taking this exact blueprint and scaling it globally? We have the tech. We have the schemes. It's really just a matter of putting the pieces together. Think about that for a bit. Thanks so much for joining me on this explanator. Keep asking the big questions, and I'll catch you next time.